at some level, the single market that we have is, if it's not quite a lie, it has a bit of a lie built into it, which I think we could all agree that it works quite well for goods, things that you can pick up and stick in a truck and move, sometimes not for e-commerce matters, but it works reasonably well for those goods. But when it comes to the more digital end of things, the service-oriented part of our economy, it's not quite there, really. And I think it would be fair to say that it's also not quite there on copyright. So, Mary, would you like to kick off with a short contribution?
Yes, well, thank you, and thank you so much for the invitation to come and talk to you about this important subject, which is going to become very much one of the big things that the European Parliament is doing over the next few months. I guess you could say I'm probably somewhere in the middle range of what's going on. As we know, the Commission has been criticised quite considerably by seeming to legislate when there is no problem. And that's one of the criticisms that's certainly been levied at what's going on at the moment. Does copyright really need fixing? Is it really not fit for purpose? And particularly with portability, as that's the first report that will be coming out, do we really need to change it? So I think it's against this background that we need to look at this. I don't think it's as stark as that. I think there are things that need to change, and we need to think perhaps more carefully and more deeply than we already have about the internet and what we do with it, how much we do regulate it. I think there should be internet regulation, how much we regulate it, because what it strikes me is that a lot of this debate should be about the internet, but it isn't, because it's difficult, and it's something I'm not sure that we as legislators have really got to grips with yet about what we do with it. I mean, it's still a very new phenomenon, and it's completely international. So I think that's really where we need to start with this, that maybe we're not addressing the most important thing that there is out there. But I'd like to look at, in a bit more detail, at certain issues which we are talking about. Cross-border access, in addition to portability, which I think everyone agrees is a good thing, what we mean by cross-border access and the importance of it. And I think as Europe becomes closer together, there is a growing demand for cross-border access. And even in Britain, which is not noted for enjoying foreign films and programmes particularly, certain things like Borgen have been a massive success. So there are cross-border markets, and quite substantial ones, for audio-visual as well as for music, which has been through this whole process already. So I think, you know, we do seriously need to think about this and how we address that demand. I think there is no doubt that consumers are looking for more choice in most areas of their lives, and that's, I think, what we should be looking at as well. Sometimes this debate is set up as an artificial construct between producers and consumers, but it's not like that. We're all working on the same thing, and we should be working together to the benefit of all of us, and I think that's something we very much need to keep in mind. I think, too, there's a need within the context of this to address business models. I know that territoriality is a big issue, and it's something which a lot of you have talked to me about. And it's something which I think we do need to consider in this whole debate about copyright and about the digital single market, and how far we can get it to work as a single market in the various media that we're talking about. Exceptions and limitations are going to be an important part of this process, and there will be, we think, at some point, a report on exceptions and limitations. And although there are general agreement about some things which should be seen as exceptions, such as education, there's an awful lot of difference across Europe. I mean, one of the interesting points of difference, which I got quite involved in when I was shadowing Julia Rader's report, was the whole question of panorama, where there's hugely divergent ways it's conducted and dealt with. In the UK, there virtually isn't any meaningful rules and regulations about Panorama. You can just go out and take pictures of whatever you like outside, basically. Whereas in France, it is quite strictly regulated, and there certain buildings and outdoor works of art do come under copyright. So there are big differences in the way that exceptions and limitations are operated. And that's a reflection, I think, of the fact that there are cultural and differences and ways of doing things across European countries which have worked for those particular member states. And it's going to be a massive debate when we come on to looking at the Commission's proposals about how far we do want to harmonise those. And we have yet really to discuss that. I mean, my own view is that the things which are exceptions are fairly clear and should remain so, and possibly the things like Panorama maybe should stay as they are, because I don't think that the consumers in those particular countries want to change it particularly. So there's going to be quite a bit of compromise, I think, when we come to that. Lastly is the whole question about remuneration for creators, which is, I think, one of the most important issues that we have to deal with, because it's very much a principle of our own member states and the EU that people should receive fair remuneration, should be paid properly for what they do. And this is undermined, and I'll come back to where I started from, by the internet, when I know that many, particularly in the audiovisual sector, feel that they are just not getting paid in the way that they should be, because their work is being put up, for instance, on YouTube, and they are just simply not getting any, or certainly not enough money for it. So I think there is a real issue about platforms and platform regulation, which ties in with making sure that those who work in the creative industries and throughout the sector do get fair remuneration. So that's very briefly where I think we're at on what are the key issues. And I think we have a huge job to do, and we will be certainly doing it, I think, very intensively over the next few months.
Thank you, Mary. One point there to segue into our next speaker. It's very interesting. I sort of took away from that you are very open to growing the pie more so than maybe guarding the pie. And on that question of the internet and territoriality, we heard from Bill earlier about how that model of territoriality is a good business model. It gets the income in, it supports that fan base. But in a way, it sort of exempts those businesses from dealing with some of the effects of the internet and the digital revolution, whereas some of these creators are just thrown into those effects, and that pushes down the income that they can get. So there might be a bit of an imbalance potentially there in dealing with that. But Tacho, I know that you think territoriality is very important, and in fact, maybe the least worst, the simplest way to make sure that money is churning through the system. Can I invite you to make a contribution?
Yes. First of all, maybe I'll tell you a little bit about what is my expertise. Our company, Imagina Media Pro, we make different things in the audiovisual sector, very wide. We distribute sport rights. We produce and distribute all type of contents, feature films, TV drama, TV comedy, TV entertainment, documentaries. We own an OTT platform where we distribute our own channels and the channels from third parties. We distribute our own channels also through the internet. And we own one free TV in Spain that's going to be launched now for sports. And we are partner in one major broadcaster in Spain, which is Antena 3. So we have a view of everything that happens in the audiovisual market. And I'm a little bit amazed of what I listened before. I should say, the first thing to be clear, that for me, the pan-European copyright, the first thing I want to say is that this is not a battle between the freedom and the old regime, simply because the multi-territorial and pan-European licenses are not forbidden now. You can take one if you want. Nothing in the current copyright framework prevents multi-territorial and pan-European licenses. The reason why these licenses are not common now is simply because there is no demand for them. No one has demanded them. Changes in the copyright would force pan-European license, not allow them. They are allowed it now. what we are talking about now is about force them, oblige to this. And this is it for sports, and it's for films, and it's for any kind of TV content. It's not only a thing of the Premier League. It's a thing for people that produces films every day, or people that produce TV content, all kind of documentaries, all kind of shows, all kind of entertainment. But mainly, but I think that the main focus might be on the sports and also in the TV content. Local audiences prefer their own local content. This is completely clear here in Europe. There might be, there is a big difference in value in content from one country to the other. And this is so obvious that sometimes it puts me a little bit to say it. But for instance, the value of the Premier League in England is, I don't know, 2 billion euros for the local market. In Spain, the Spanish Football League for the local market domestic rights are 1 billion euros. You know how much is in France, the Spanish Football League? It's less than 10 million. And it's just crossing the border. And someone could say, well, it's so easy, you just cross the border. But it's got completely different thing, the value from one to the other. TV shows, sports, and even films, they do something very important in territoriality. They adapt their content to make it for the local viewers. So when we have exclusive rights per countries, when someone buys a right for Spanish right for France, what it is doing is converting this Spanish content, trying to convert it to French content in order to attract their viewers. If they cannot do that anymore, the content will have less value in France than it has now. This is also simply. There is no local viewers at the European level, or the European Union level. The level of viewers is local, is national. The people that share the same common language, the same traditions, the same heritage, the same common interest, whatever. This is obvious also that you have to only look to the TV ratings of any TV station to acknowledge that. Creating such pan-European copyright framework in sports, for instance, will provoke that, for instance, the Spanish platform that buys the rights for the Spanish Football League in Spain will be obliged to buy the rights for the whole continent. And what they will do, as my colleague from the Premier League was saying before, is that they will charge the other countries exactly what they're charging now in Spain. Because the problem that we were...
Who would pay? If you say it's not worth
Nobody
anything.
will pay. But if you... And the second important thing
Wouldn't that
is...
not happen in the market then?
The second important thing, for instance, is that because they will get so less money from these countries because nobody will want to pay, that they will not adapt the content to the local country, to this country. So if they go to Bulgaria, they even don't care. The content is in Spanish or whatever. They don't care because they receive so less money. And they will receive very few money, not from Bulgaria, even from France, even from Germany, even from Italy. And the problem what we are facing here is, I hear before someone saying that if I'm Spanish and I want to receive the Premier League in English in Spain because I want my subscription to Sky. This is not the main problem. The main problem, if I'm English and I'm subscribing to Spanish platform because the cost of receiving the Premier League in Spain is much less than receiving it in England. And that's a fraud. Because what you are doing is not just being that you want to... I'm in England, but I prefer to follow the Premier League by the Spanish platform because I prefer to listen it in with the Spanish accent.
Is it fraud or good consumer awareness?
Well,
Isn't that consumer choice
what
as
it
well?
what it is a fraud. I mean, you can. I mean, for the well of nothing. I mean, for the well of consumers is not something that is written in stone, because we have 88% of piracy in internet. 500 million euros are lost every year on piracy only in football. Only in football. So we have to face also the situation. We cannot just open everything and believe that people will behave properly. We have to think that there are some rules that we have to follow. And we need to protect the people, the creatives, even if they are football players, or if they are producers, or if they are writers, or if they are directors. We have to protect them in order to make this business growing up and not shrinking.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That is a great segue to Martin, because if I can not summarize, but preempt you a little bit, Martin, you focus a lot on the evidence base behind what's happening in the market, so matching whatever the rules are or could be to the market reality and sort of assessing the gaps that exist there or the alignments that exist there. So could I ask you, are those sort of claims correct? Is it the case that there's no demand out there for some of that content across borders, and the behaviors that people are engaging in? You know, what incentives can exist for them to behave in a way that complies with rules, that generates income for creators?
Well, in some ways, you point to one of the issues immediately, that a lot of the data is held by interested parties, which makes it very hard to assess these markets properly. I direct a research consortium in the UK, which is globally the first attempt to empirically study copyright in a sustainable way. And this is a real obstacle. I mean, a lot of the data comes with interests attached, and we made an effort to catalog 500 empirical studies now under copyrightevidence.org. We try also to identify who funds the studies. We try to identify which are peer-reviewed to academic standards. And you still get a skew. You get a skew, you know, that a lot of studies deal with music and piracy, because that's where the money went for a while. So a lot of the issues which have surfaced now in the geo-blocking and territoriality debate haven't really been studied sufficiently. I mean, there are economic studies on market discrimination, price discrimination, and the effects on economic welfare if you can serve different segments at different prices. But even in different areas of industry, in different sectors, the evidence is not straightforward. So it's always a difficult call. But what I would say is that compared to where we were 15 years ago, you know, when e-commerce directive and information society directive were adopted, the situation is quite different now. We have the internet as a data producing machine, and most of the questions which have been asked here today, they could be answered. They could be answered if the will would be there to have an independent structure. And obviously, the academic cycle is a bit slower. Mm-hmm. You know, industry will commission a consultant, and they will produce a report, you know, basically with the direction they've been given, and that will, you know, they're able to turn it around in 6 months. Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about data around how consumers actually behave, not opinion surveys of what they would like or not.
Well, even that, I mean, we know statistics have to be treated carefully. But over time, if you look at, let's say, issues with health and tobacco, or if you look at global warming and environment, over a long period of time, the body of evidence shifts. And I think in copyright law, we are in a similar situation now. So we are, I think, at a tipping point where there will be a consensus, and where a lot of these claims have to be substantiated or put aside. So that's, I would say, my broad assessment. mean, I appreciate that I've been invited as an academic here and into an environment where that's quite unusual. And I think if I step back a little bit, it seems to be if we regulate effectively, we have to know more about the markets we regulate. And what is beginning to emerge, cultural markets are markets which quite fast product cycles. They're winner-take-all dominated, so a few winners is where most of the share of revenues goes. And after 5 years, most products have disappeared. Yet we have a copyright term of life plus 70 years. So this kind of overprotection also comes with a cost. So it is obvious that unused works do not help anybody. Okay, so they don't help the right holders, they don't help the users. So if after 5 years, half of the stuff has disappeared, if after 50 years, 2% or 3% of books are still available, if 7% of films are still available, what's happening to the rest? So there's clearly value there, but it's value which is not realized. So this whole kind of misbalance of the system cannot be addressed by creating a bigger market. The digital single market doesn't change that fundamental issue, which is that there's tons of stuff which has value, but which isn't used. And inbuilt into the system is a redistribution from the living to the dead. So under the artist resale directive, only 18% of the money collected goes actually to living artists. The rest goes to estates. Again, these kind of realities are beginning to emerge, and they show that the whole system is calibrated in the wrong way. And if one takes it seriously, what a copyright system is trying to achieve, which is encourage creativity, reward creators, we've somehow ended up in the wrong place. So how do we get out of that? I mean, that's a very difficult political question, and I'm probably
you
not
might have just extended the timeline on that.
Yeah.
With all of those very valid points. On that note, can I invite some questions from the audience? There's got to be some interest out there. I can see you all tweeting away, so...
Thank you. My name is Mark Lichtenheim. I'm chairman of the Sports Rights Owners Coalition. It's coming out very clearly, I think, in this debate overall, two main things. One is that there isn't even a single market for AV content and sport in Europe waiting to be digitized. So the starting point seems to be wrong in many ways, that unless you have uniform demand for a product, you can't artificially impose some kind of digital single market. Tacho made the point, nobody's stopping anybody acquiring rights on a pan-regional basis, but they don't because there's not the demand. Which leads me to the other main point, which is actually territoriality is a consequence of the market demand within Europe. It's not something which is being artificially imposed on the way that things are being sold. It is the way that people want to consume it. And we have this incredibly diverse offer of digital content and digital content out there, which, as has been said many times already, would not be there if you allowed cross-border access to it, because it would undermine the whole market dynamics that enable that very distinctly territorial content to exist. I'm sorry, that's more of a statement than a question, but it does seem that we have been looking at this sort of inside out or upside down.
Well, if I pick up a thought that you've just made and turn it into a question. So let's imagine you do want to acquire one of these pan-EU licenses. Who would I go to if I wanted to acquire the license to broadcast the World Swimming Championships next time they come round to everyone via my new web TV site that I'm setting up? Who would I actually speak to make that happen?
You go to the owner of the rights, you buy it, and once you have it, and you have invested your money...
Yep. But there are some one-stop shops where I can do it easily, or I have to do it 28 times?
You can go to the Swimming Federation if you want to buy that, and once you have committed to pay the money that you have to pay, and you have proved that you are going to pay it in the future, you will realize that the only way that you have in order to make money back is to sell it on an exclusive basis, country per country.
And it's true that Netflix is...
Yes.
Netflix has moved
that's why
to...
nobody does it.
Netflix has moved to essentially a pan-European model already, so they now acquire the rights for all territories in one go. They're no longer conform to the... So I think the market could deliver a digital single market, but is that a result which would deliver some of these issues with minority languages? Would it solve some of the issues which were, I think, legitimately raised by Julia Reda? I think that's a question which the market probably wouldn't deliver under the current structure.
Okay, who else has a question there? Yes, gentleman in the middle.
Yes, my name is Stefan Pross from the German Football League, the Bundesliga. I just wanted to give a comment
We're
to
going to have
what
a
you said.
non-sport question there.
Just to give a comment to what has just been said about the minorities. In the current system, the core market for the Bundesliga is the German-speaking countries. And as you know, there's also a part called Südtirol in northern Italy, which is also part of this license. So it is possible at the moment to give licenses according to languages or also to minority languages. It is not that you have to have a pan-European market or passive sales or something like this. And I would like to ask maybe to one of you, we have heard about passive sales, and I don't know who's going to answer this one, maybe Mr. Kretschmer, but we heard about passive sales, and we know that the concept stems from passive sales in goods and products. And we're now talking about here, when we talk about internet and online, we talk about services. So how would you keep passive sales, or how would you transform passive sales into the internet environment and keep it passive? Because it is so viral that in 10 seconds everybody would know where's the cheapest service of the most attractive product. So is there any passive sales possible in the internet?
I don't have an answer to that. It's a tricky one.
Have you come across it, Mary?
I haven't. I agree. I think it's... I mean, I'm very glad you've raised that, because it's exactly these sorts of things which we need to give some consideration to, and I don't think we are, because maybe we're not asking the right questions, which is why it's always quite useful to have discussions like this. I mean, thank you for saying that. I mean, I'm not sure I've got any instant answers either.
We've got one gentleman over here, as long as it's a non-sport question.
The consumer organizations. I do have an answer to that question, and also for Mary, I would recommend you to read the Commission's guideline on vertical restraints, in which these have specifically clarified. And even there is an OECD guidance document in which they say that the concept of passive and active sales is easily transferable to the digital environment. So in the whole discussion that this is not possible to apply in the digital world, it sounds rather like a lobbying technique to deviate the attention to the real problem instead of actually trying to find a solution to it. Thank you.
Okay. Have we got one more question from the audience? No. Okay. Well, I might wrap it up with one final question to all of the panelists. Is it realistic to think that we can ever get a single market for copyright? Or should we be more realistic and think that we're going to inch along towards something that looks more like a single market for copyright?
I would agree with that. Having been involved in this for a while now and shadowing the Reda report, it's become very clear that there isn't going to be a massive agreement on a harmonised copyright anytime soon. I mean, there are MEPs who would like to see that, and there is definitely a group there, and there's quite a force there. But it's certainly not what the Commission will be proposing when we get the reports at some point in the next few months. So it's not really it's absolutely not on their agenda at all. In fact, I think what you will see when we get the Commission proposals is that they are really very conservative and don't take anything very much further, because I think we're all struggling with quite how far we can go, and because copyright is so different in many ways across the whole of Europe, it's not something that you can impose quickly or easily, should you wish to do that anyway. So I think this is going to be a very slow and gradual process. and this is just the start of it. And I think this could go on for a very long time.
Good news for the lawyers. Thatcher.
Well, if for a single market we understand to prevent and forbidden to sell exclusive rights for different territories, which is not exactly what I think for a single market, but let's say that there's this prohibition. If a single market we understand a prohibition of selling exclusive rights for different territories, I hope that we will not have it in a long time. I see very difficult, and if it happens, it will cause a lot of trouble, a lot of problems. And I'm afraid that this thing about the portability, if it's not taken as a real portability, that it means that it really means that we give rights to someone that really lives in a country and temporarily moves for a short period of time to another country, the right to take with him his subscription or whatever, and immediately comes back to his country of native. If we don't understand it and we don't put measures to be like that, I hope that this is just the first step that someone is taking in order to break this territoriality.
And Martin, is there any hope that we're going to make these rules based on evidence, or is it going to get sidetracked?
Normally businesses like bigger markets, but they obviously don't like to change business models they have established. On windowing, businesses have radically changed their operate. They had 4 windows 10 years ago, and now there are 13 windows, and they've come very close together. So people do change their practices, and they change them probably more in response to technology than to these kind of political dynamics. But I would suggest the move is inevitable, and the sensible thing to do is have a period of time with stages which makes it possible for the parties to adjust the way they do business. That seems to be perfectly feasible. The cultural diversity considerations should be built in from the very beginning. I think that's an important part, and I think Mrs. Hannibal is very right to point that out.
Excellent. Well, we've got another stage transition now, and that involves us leaving the stage and inviting Nick Hurst and the next group of panelists who are talking about publishing in the digital era. So a round of applause for these guys. Thank you.